Nice.
Alright. Hi, this is the video for my first speech for the speech class. This is my lovely audience. We have Gloria, Jess, AJ, Brandon, Sarah, and Ashley. She's going to step outside of the frame for a second so she can focus the camera in on me and then step back in, and I will begin my speech. Okay. Dun, dun, dun. That's totally staying. You good?
Yes.
Okay.
It went out of focus. There. Okay.
Alright. So, our first assignment for this speech class was to do a speech about someone that you personally admire. And I decided to, wait, I'm going to let you all guess. This is just totally random. Someone had this with them. This was not planned. Does anybody recognize this symbol? This is like more recognizable than frickin' Mickey Mouse ears. It's the Playboy Bunny symbol. And today's speech is going to be about Hugh Hefner. Okay. Which is somebody that I personally admire. And I'm sure everyone is going to think this is going to be all about the fluff and stuff, but there's actually some really serious reasons that I personally admire Hugh Hefner. So, besides creating one of the most recognizable symbols in America's culture today, he really redefined social norms. We now have the word centerfold. It was never around before Hugh Hefner. He redefined the name Playboy. And he created an empire, more than what most people would think about with the beautiful girls and all that stuff. In a way, he was a feminist, which I think people would be really surprised to hear that said. But I think that the people who would be surprised would be our generation, because what we know Hugh Hefner from is The Girls Next Door, the Playboy Club in Las Vegas, the revamp of the 90s, in the 90s, the magazine. So we really only know him from the Playboy stuff. But what people forget is this man has had 87 years to help define how America treats sexuality. And it's going to be very hard to hit on all the best points in an 87-year lifespan, but I'm going to try. So the background for Hugh Hefner is he was born in Illinois in 1927 to two very conservative Methodist parents. And this is the era, 1927, this is silent films. The talkie hadn't even been introduced. Prohibition. This is a very conservative time in America. He attended high school, he entered the military in 1944. He was a war reporter during World War II. He was discharged honorably in 46, then attended U of L and earned a bachelor's in psych with creative arts minors in 2 years. Then he went on to Northwestern University and wrote a thesis, Sex Behavior in U.S. Law. And he referenced heavily on Alfred Kinsey's works. And since we're all from Indiana, we are probably pretty familiar with Alfred Kinsey. His publications were put out in 1949. It was the first surveys about modern human sexuality. And Hugh Hefner focused on this about the same time because he realized that if U.S. laws on sexuality were enforced, most people would end up in jail. And he found this to be completely ridiculous that our country tried to define what two people could do in a bedroom behind closed doors. And he wanted to see that change in his lifetime. So, after college, he went to work at Esquire, which was like Gentleman's Magazine of the 30s. And he wanted to see a new flavor of a gentleman's magazine. So, in 1953, at the age of 27, he published the first issue of Playboy with the bunny logo. It started out being called Stag Club Party, but people thought that was going to be a little bit too risque, so he changed it to Playboy and adopted the bunny icon, which has carried on for the last 75 years. He had $1,000 in backing He borrowed $600 from a bank for a personal loan and liquidated his assets and sold his furniture to publish the first issue of Playboy. And the centerfold model was Marilyn Monroe. And in the first issue, he sold 53,000 copies with a $1,000 startup. By 1958, he sold 1 million copies per issue. And by 1972, Playboy had a circulation of 7 million copies per issue. So in 20 years, this was huge. He hit some snags pretty much as soon as he started publishing Playboy. And this is really where he helped our generation improve the freedoms that we have. In the early 1960s, he was totally being speared as a smut merchant. That went on for decades and really revamped in the 80s. He was arrested in 1963 for obscenity charges and was acquitted in trial. And up until Playboy, the U.S. Postal Service, even though there was different laws on the books that said it wasn't illegal, the U.S. Postal Service tried to regulate what you sent through the mail. And you could not send any nude photographs. Any kind of nude photography in magazines, whatever, was illegal. And the U.S. Postal Service would try to yank your sector mailing permits. And this is kind of unbelievable for our generation because I could take off my clothes and send a pretty awesome picture to somebody right now. Well, it might be awesome to some people. Send a pretty awesome naked picture to somebody right now. But this is the era. This is the era before computers, before email, before text messages, and basically the United States Postal Service was saying that a married couple couldn't take some racy photos and mail them to each other if they were away from each other for a period of time. I mean, this was really, really conservative values coming into play here. Probably not so great conservative values. So he, again, had to go to trial, and he won, and his magazine was able to be sent to people. So he was already receiving negative attention because of all these things, and his other political pursuits didn't really win him any favors either. So he was all about the evil liberal agenda. He established the Playboy Foundation, which has worked and donated money to support abortion rights and birth control rights for women since 1965. He personally wrote editorials and did interviews and donated money towards legalization of marijuana issues and condom distribution to be more readily available in the U.S. So in 1965, he was fighting for the legalization of marijuana, and we now know in 2013, there's still only about 3 states that are are legal to have marijuana, possess marijuana now. So he was pretty much decades ahead of his time. In 1969, Playboy After Dark was one of the shows that he produced. He let Country Joe McDonald sing the Anti-War song, I Feel Like I'm Fixin' to Die Rag. And the verse is like, and it's 1, 2, 3, what are we fighting for? Don't ask me, I don't give a damn, next stop is Vietnam. Which was crazy for somebody to allow anti-Vietnam sentiment to be on the air, but he welcomed it on his shows. And through the Playboy Foundation, he donated his private jet, the Big Bunny, to fly Vietnamese orphans to their new homes in the United States during the entire Vietnam War. One of his biggest things that he helped in, one of the biggest movements that he helped with in the United States was racial freedom and tolerance. In the Playboy's Penthouse show, it aired in 1959, and it showed black performers mingling with white guests, which was never shown on TV in that era. First black playmate appeared in 1965. Again, it was the first black female model in the United States. People were literally risking their lives to register black voters in the South. The Playboy clubs had been opened up at this point in the 1960s, and they could be franchised, and the franchises in Miami and New Orleans were segregated. So he bought back the franchises and said, you can't use our name and logo if you're not going to allow your guests to integrate and mingle socially. And then he sent black comedian Dick Gregory to perform in the clubs in the South with a lot of added security. Playboy's Penthouse and the Playboy After Dark shows featured black talent and mixed race singing groups like the Gateway Singers, Miles Davis, Sammy Davis Jr., and others. So, the magazine itself, which is probably what everybody knows, I think that probably every man in America has their favorite issue of Playboy. Well, I have my favorite issue of Playboy. This is the Dita Von Teese issue that came out in 2000, The Return of Fetish. Obviously, I'm not going to open it up. I don't want to offend anybody. But the magazine's known for the pictures, and one of his most famous quotes is to say, if the pictures didn't exist, I would be the editor of a literary magazine, which is totally true. Also, probably one of the most famous quotes from Every Man in America is, I buy it and read the articles. But there really was articles that were worthwhile in the magazine. There are written pieces by John Updike, Ian Fleming, written pieces by Carl Sagan, the astronomer. He was the only person in America that would publish Ray Bradbury's short story Fahrenheit 451, which is later adapted into the novel, which is now recognized as one of the leading examples of classic 20th century fiction. And a lot of people get to read it in college. And he published interviews with Malcolm X, Miles Davis, Martin Luther King Jr., and Jimmy Carter. And Jimmy Carter was actually the first U.S. president that allowed himself to be interviewed by Playboy, which was a huge deal in 1976. And apparently, he even commented on the magazine and said, I've looked on a lot of women with lust. I've committed adultery in my heart many times. God recognizes this, as he does in everyone, and will forgive us all. So he basically said, hey, it's okay if you do a little bit of looking as long as you're not touching. Hugh Hefner finally received legitimacy in the publishing world when he was inducted into the American Society of Magazine Editors Hall of Fame. So finally people recognized that the magazine was more than just the pictures, which was pretty awesome. When Hugh Hefner started to make the Playboy magazine and build the empire and open the clubs and all that stuff, he said that his goal for America, what he thought that the ultimate American dream was to be able to pursue political, personal freedom, economic freedom. And what he wanted to see happen in the country was the idea that sex was for recreation and not procreation be okay. And could be enjoyed by the girl next door, which is kind of the way the centerfolds went. They were the girl next door, the playmate next door. That sex could be enjoyed by the good girl, by everyone. And he managed to succeed. He changed the perspective of a nation slowly but surely with those goals by saying that you can enjoy good literature, good books, fine wine, and you can have a healthy sex life, and that's okay. The people who questioned Hugh Hefner's motives about helping the world diversify and open up and become a little bit less conservative, they said that he made women into objects. Women were objectified. And this is why people probably would say it's interesting to think that he was a boon for women's lib. But in response, he said, women are sexual objects. If they weren't sexual objects, there wouldn't be another generation. That's what makes the world go around. He said that he was a lover of women in all ways, not just the physical form, but what's in their mind, what's in their heart, what's in their spirit, everything. And he would say that he's a lover of women more than the women's lives. That he's a lover of women's equality, and sexual liberation as a part of that. which makes him kind of the ultimate feminist. So, these are all of the reasons that I find Hugh Hefner to be a very interesting person, and why I wanted to let our generation know a little bit more about what he actually did for us, because if he hadn't started in the 50s and 60s with the Playboy clubs and the Playboy magazine and getting the U.S. Postal Service to allow naked pictures to be sent in the mail, the world would probably be a very different place. Maybe some of it for the better, but most of it for the worse, because sexual liberation has helped fuel liberation and freedom for women in every avenue of life. And that's why I wanted to let you all know why I wanted to talk about Hugh Hefner today. Thank you. Shut the camera off.
Well done. There were some interesting facts in there. Like, I didn't know Marilyn Monroe was in his first shoot, and I never thought about the fact that he was the first African American woman.